June 5, 1943. Rain fell sideways across the dispersal area of an airfield in southern England, blurring the silhouettes of fighter planes lined up like sleeping beasts. Beneath one of them, a ground mechanic in oil-stained overalls braced himself under a roaring P-47 Thunderbolt. The sound was overwhelming, metallic thunder shaking the puddles at his boots, exhaust flames licking through the rain. His name wasn't famous, not written in any official record, but that night he would do something that would ripple through the entire U.S. Army Air Forces. He would make a small adjustment to the fuel mixture lever, an act so simple, so improvised, it should have gone unnoticed. Instead, it would help transform the P-47 from a lumbering brute into a 470-mile-per-hour monster. The Thunderbolt had not been born a hero. When it first appeared in 1942, pilots were unimpressed. The thing was enormous. Over 10,000 pounds of steel rivets and self-sealing fuel tanks. It was so large that some joked it needed its own airfield. Pilots called it a Jug, short for Juggernaut, though some swore it meant milk jug for how clumsy it looked. It couldn't climb like the German Messerschmitts. It couldn't turn like the Spitfire, and it guzzled fuel like a drunk sailor. To many, it seemed proof that American engineers had gone overboard. Alexander Kartveli, the Georgian-born designer behind Republic Aviation's thunderous creation, defended it with passion. "You cannot kill it," he once said, half in pride and half in defiance. And in truth, the P-47's R 2800 double Wasp engine was a masterpiece of power and endurance. It just hadn't been fully understood. When the 8th Air Force began operations from English soil, those early Thunderbolts struggled to keep pace above 20,000 feet. The pilots complained of losing engine power when climbing to bomber escort altitude. Many blamed the supercharger. Others blamed weight. The real culprit was far less glamorous. A subtle imbalance in the engine's fuel-air mixture. At high altitudes, where the air thins and cold bites through flight jackets, engines must breathe differently. Too much fuel and the engine runs rich, choking on its own power. Too little and it starves. Pilots could manually lean the mixture, but the recommended settings from the manuals didn't seem to work in the unpredictable conditions over Europe. The Thunderbolt's big radial engine, already complex, became temperamental in thin air. Every squadron had its share of engines that coughed, sputtered, and gave up mid-climb. That rainy evening, the mechanic, let's imagine him as a sergeant named Miller, grew frustrated. He'd watched his pilots come back fuming about sluggish performance. He had heard them mutter about how even the new Mustangs were overtaking them. So, with a mix of defiance and curiosity, he pulled off the cowling, adjusted the carburetor linkage, and tweaked the mixture controls slightly leaner. Nothing radical, just intuition. When the pilot fired up the engine for a test, the difference was immediate. The engine didn't sputter. It purred. The vibration smoothed. The exhaust note deepened, and a few moments later, the plane took off into the gray sky. From the ground, Miller watched as the Thunderbolt climbed, and kept climbing. Its engine didn't falter this time. It held steady as it pierced the clouds. When the pilot landed, his grin said everything. "Whatever you did," he shouted over the roar, "do it again." Word spread fast. At that point in the war, good rumors traveled quicker than orders. Pilots of the 56th Fighter Group, Zemke's Wolf Pack, heard about this magic setting. They were already famous for bending the rules and experimenting. Colonel Hubert Zemke, the unit's commander, encouraged innovation. "If it keeps you alive," he'd say, "it's regulation enough." Soon, more Thunderbolts in the squadron began to fly with this adjusted mixture. Slightly leaner, slightly riskier, but noticeably more powerful at altitude. Officially, this kind of field modification wasn't authorized, but unofficially, it was changing the way the plane behaved. Pilots reported faster climb rates and more stable performance at 25,000 feet. The logbooks began showing mysterious notes. Mixture adjusted, engine strong, RPM steady. Some even marked their fuel control panels with chalk lines to remember the sweet spot. It was mechanical jazz, part science, part instinct. By mid-1943, the Thunderbolt had gone from being the butt of jokes to a machine pilot secretly trusted. Its ruggedness was legendary. It could take flak damage that would tear other fighters apart and still bring its pilot home. But now it had something new: speed. In tests over England, several P-47s hit speeds over 470 miles per hour in dives and sustained level runs, numbers that put them toe-to-toe with the Luftwaffe's best. It wasn't supposed to be possible. The Republic engineers back in New York hadn't predicted these figures. Something had changed in the field. Mechanics began writing home about it. Letters to the engineering corps mentioned richer performance through leaner mix. The Army Air Force's technical officers started taking notice. What was going on out there in the muddy airstrips of Suffolk and Norfolk? Why were pilots pushing their jugs harder than ever before, and somehow not blowing engines? There are scattered reports from maintenance records that confirm small tweaks in carburetor calibration across multiple squadrons in mid-1943. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would make front-page news. But historians later noticed a sharp performance curve upward in Thunderbolt combat data after that date. In those months, the Jug started taking down German fighters that previously outclimbed it. Pilots stopped calling it slow. Instead, they began to talk about its speed in disbelief. The story has an almost poetic irony. The most powerful fighter engine in the world improved not because of new parts or funding, but because of curiosity. Sometimes the war turned mechanics into scientists. And sometimes that science came with cigarette ash on the logbook margins. One pilot later recalled in an interview, before the fix, the Jug would gasp for air up high. After, it was like she got her second wind. You could feel it in your bones. He described a moment the manifold pressure stabilized during a high-altitude chase, the engine no longer whining but humming, as if grateful for correction. Of course, there was risk. Engines could run too hot, if leaned too much. Pilots learned through near misses, occasional backfires, a few forced landings. But the balance they found gave them power where it mattered most. In the climb toward enemy bombers or when diving out of danger. In the mess halls at night, amid laughter and exhaustion, they joked about the Jug's newfound appetite. "You'd think we fed it better gas," one pilot said, "but we just taught it how to breathe." Someone added, "Maybe we should patent that and sell it back to Republic." There was pride behind the jokes, a sense that they'd tamed the beast themselves. Meanwhile, back at the Republic Aviation plant in Farmingdale, engineers started getting strange field reports about exceptional performance at altitude. Test pilots back home tried to replicate it, but couldn't at first. The conditions in the English air war, humidity, pressure, temperature, were unique. What had been discovered by accident in a rain-soaked airfield could only truly exist there. Still, curiosity took hold. The Army Air Forces began sending technical teams to investigate the field adjustments. The reports filtered upward through layers of bureaucracy. By autumn 1943, they reached the engineering branch, which confirmed that the Thunderbolt's fuel-air mixture system could indeed be optimized for better combustion efficiency at altitude. The discovery that began as one mechanic's hunch was becoming official science. The men on the ground didn't care about the chemistry. They just knew their planes worked better. One recalled that first mission after the adjustment, a bomber escort deep into enemy territory. "We were used to hearing her strain up there," he said. "That day she sang." The metaphor wasn't lost on anyone. In the cockpit, surrounded by instruments in the endless blue void, that engine note became the sound of survival. It's easy to romanticize moments like this, to imagine a single spark of genius changing the course of the war. But in truth, it was dozens of small sparks, mechanics, pilots, and engineers all feeling their way toward understanding. The Thunderbolt didn't suddenly become a new plane overnight. It evolved like all good machines do, through trial, sweat, and a touch of stubbornness. And yet, something about that transformation captured the imagination. Maybe because it symbolized what wartime innovation often looked like. Not laboratories and blueprints, but grease-stained hands and improvised decisions made under the pressure of survival. By late 1943, Luftwaffe pilots began reporting American fighters diving on them with shocking speed. Some thought they were new models. They weren't. They were the same old Jugs, just finally breathing right. As rain continued to fall across English fields, mechanics like Miller went about their work, unaware they'd helped rewrite aviation history. Somewhere between instinct and accident, they'd found a way to unleash what the engineers had built but never fully unlocked. And as those engines roared to the clouds, a quiet question hung in the air. If a simple change in chemistry could do this, what else might these machines be hiding, waiting for someone to discover it? What came next would answer that question and propel the Thunderbolt into legend. By the winter of 1943, the rumor had become an official obsession. Somewhere between the muddy airfields of East Anglia and the polished offices of Wright Field, the U.S. Army Air Forces realized that something unusual was happening with their biggest, most stubborn fighter. The P-47 Thunderbolt, once dismissed as a heavy, fuel-hungry brute, was outperforming its own factory specifications. Pilots were reporting climb rates and speeds that the engineers at Republic Aviation had never seen in the data sheets. Someone at headquarters scribbled a single question on a test report. Why are the jugs suddenly faster? So began a quiet investigation that would link frontline improvisation with cutting-edge science. Republic's chief engineer, Alexander Kartveli, was informed that field mechanics had been experimenting with carburetor settings. His reaction, by all accounts, was a mix of irritation and fascination. He knew how sensitive the R-2800 double wasp engine was to small changes. One wrong turn of a screw, he supposedly muttered, and you turned thunder into silence. But he also knew that innovation in war rarely followed the manual. The factory had built the muscle. The battlefield was teaching it how to breathe. At Wright Field in Ohio, engineers began running controlled tests. They adjusted mixture levers, fuel nozzles, and supercharger settings to simulate the field reports. The early results were erratic. Some engines overheated. Others barely started. But when the balance was right, just lean enough to sharpen combustion, just rich enough to keep temperatures under control, the numbers began to climb. On the test bench, AP-47 engine reached 2,500 horsepower in short bursts. The official limit was 2,000. The data sheets filled with exclamation marks. Across the Atlantic, the 56 fighter group continued to fly like nothing had changed, except everything had. The Wolf Pack, as the Germans began calling them, was now claiming victories at a rate that startled Allied command. On some missions, they escorted bombers all the way to the Ruhr and back, something the Thunderbolt hadn't been expected to do. The Luftwaffe, once confident in its altitude advantage, began to lose that edge. Pilots in FW-190s who tried to climb away found the big American fighters still behind them, engines howling with a new ferocity. The chemistry behind the transformation was simple but beautiful. Aviation gasoline in 1943 was evolving almost as fast as the planes themselves. The British had developed 100-octane fuel early in the war, allowing higher compression ratios and more power. Now, American refiners were experimenting with 150-octane blends, fuel so rich in performance additives that it could survive tremendous cylinder pressures. When combined with the Thunderbolt mechanical supercharger and the adjusted fuel-air mixture, it created a perfect storm of combustion efficiency. It wasn't just more power, it was smarter power. Engineers described the process in dry technical language, optimized stoichiometric ratio. But the pilots had their own description. She breathes better up there, they'd say, patting the cowling after landing. The mixture tweak let the massive R-2800 gulp in the thin air over Germany and turn it into thunder. The airplane that had once lumbered into battle now streaked across the sky at speeds touching 470 miles per hour. One of the first official tests came from NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, the quiet ancestor of NASA. In early 1944, they confirmed that when running on 150-octane fuel and optimized mixture, the P-47 could maintain combat power far longer without overheating. The results were forwarded to the 8th Air Force. Soon, a general order was issued: adopt revised mixture and manifold settings as field standard. What had begun as a rain-soaked guess in a British hangar was now military doctrine. In the cockpit, the change was visceral. Pilots spoke of how the Jug no longer felt heavy when climbing through cloud. It leapt forward when the throttle opened, the vibration smoother, the controls lighter. One pilot described chasing a German FW-190 over the Ardennes. He started to pull away, like always. Then suddenly I wasn't losing ground anymore. The airspeed needle just kept creeping up. I remember laughing, because the old Jug wasn't supposed to do that. Of course, speed alone didn't make the Thunderbolt great. Its real strength was that it could take punishment. With the mixture fixed, that durability finally met performance. Pilots could dive from 30,000 feet, hit top speed, and pull out without fear their engines quitting. The 56th and 78th fighter groups began flying deeper escort missions. Bombers that had once flown terrified of German interceptors now had a guardian angel, one that spat 8.50 caliber machine guns and could soak up damage like no other. Even the Luftwaffe began to respect it. Captured German intelligence summaries from late 1944 mention an American fighter with exceptional diving speed and resilience. Pilots who survived encounters described Thunderbolts falling from the sky like meteors, then climbing again as if nothing happened. The mixture discovery had turned an ungainly protector into a predator. There was humor in it, too. The word Jug, once an insult, became a badge of honor. She's a big girl, one pilot joked, but now she dances. Republic Aviation leaned into it, printing posters with Thunderbolts wrapped around milk jugs. Even the engineers learned to laugh. One of them reportedly said, "We designed a bulldozer with wings, and the pilots taught it ballet." Back home, production surged. The factory workers, many of them women, didn't know the details of mixture ratios or combustion chemistry, but they could sense pride in the telegrams arriving from England. Thunderbolt performing beautifully. One read, "Pilots confident, enemy afraid." For a country still rationing sugar and gasoline, those words meant something more than technical success. They were proof that American ingenuity, even improvised in the field, could outthink an empire built on precision. By mid-1944, every new P-47 left the factory with improved fuel control settings and permission to use 150-octane fuel. The official maximum speed was now listed at 473 miles per hour, numbers that would have been laughed at a year earlier. It wasn't just engineering. It was belief catching up to reality. On the ground, the mechanics who had started it all kept their humor modest. They still worked in the mud, still cursed at stuck valves and leaky hydraulic lines. But they carried a quiet satisfaction. They had seen what curiosity could do. "We just wanted the damn thing to run right," one said in an interview years later. "Didn't think we were making history. We just leaned her out a bit and prayed she wouldn't explode." As the war pressed on, Thunderbolts became a symbol of unstoppable presence. They strafed trains in France, shredded armored columns during the Normandy campaign, and tore across Europe with dive speeds that made the earth tremble. In the cockpit, pilots talked about their machines as partners. "The Jug talks to you," one said. "If you listen right, she'll tell you when she's happy." The new fuel mixture gave her a deeper voice, a growl that vibrated to the pilot's boots, through the stick, through the very air. When peace finally came, the world moved on to jets. The Thunderbolt was retired from frontline service, replaced by sleeker machines of aluminum and fire. But among those who flew her, the memory endured. Veterans would gather at air shows and pause when one of the old radios started up. That sound, the layered rumble of 18 cylinders finding their rhythm, still raised goosebumps. One pilot described it as God clearing his throat. Historians later tried to quantify what the mixture discovery meant. Did it shorten the war? Probably not. Did it save lives? Almost certainly. It gave pilots confidence, gave commanders flexibility, and gave engineers proof that innovation didn't always wear a lab coat. In the margins of test reports, someone at Wright Field had once scribbled, "Field genius, unquantifiable." That may be the best summary ever written of wartime progress. The irony of the whole story is that the P-47's transformation wasn't about adding power, but about understanding it. It's easy to think victory comes from more horsepower, more fuel, more guns. But sometimes it comes from precision, from restraint. The Thunderbolt's true evolution began the moment someone realized it didn't need to work harder. It just needed to breathe correctly. Even decades later, pilots teaching in modern flight schools still mention mixture control as a fundamental lesson. Leaning the mixture for efficiency isn't just good practice. It's history repeating itself. Somewhere in that red mixture knob is a story of curiosity under fire, of men in cold hangars tweaking levers until thunder sounded right. When the surviving Thunderbolts fly today, at air shows in the U.S. or over quiet English fields, their engines carry that same rhythm discovered in 1943. The audience may only hear noise, but for those who know the story, each pulse of sound is memory. The rain, the mechanic's hand, the impossible climb. The final irony is that nobody ever found out who first made that critical adjustment. There's no record, no medal, no name carved in marble. Just a shared mythology of pilots who swore they remembered the day the Jug woke up. Maybe that's fitting. Some stories in war aren't about heroes. They're about moments, small, almost invisible choices that change everything. So when we think of the Thunderbolt thundering through the European sky at 470 miles per hour, we're not just hearing metal and fuel. We're hearing the echo of curiosity, the whisper of a mechanic who refused to accept that a 10-ton machine couldn't fly like lightning. It began as a mistake in the mud. It ended as a lesson in the sky, that sometimes power isn't found by adding more, but by understanding better. And for a brief, shining moment in 1943, the men who flew and fixed the Thunderbolt learned that lesson the loudest way possible, by turning thunder into victory.